Well, hello again, my friends, and welcome once more to the Invisible College. Now, today I just want to have what you could call a sort of fireside chat. I want to talk a little bit about the college itself, how it came about, a little bit about my own history, and why I'm doing this. Because I know that people are curious. I mean, the guy comes on here and he makes all these very strange videos and posts them up and invites you to join his college, and you think, well, hang on a minute, who is he? Where's he coming from? What's this all about? So I'm going to say a few words. We'll just see where it goes, yeah? And we'll take it from there. Over my morning coffee. Lazy Sunday. That's the name of the coffee, and it's very nice. Okay, right. Well, I'm like you. I'm just a bloke, right? Or, okay, if you're a woman, you're not like me in that sense. I grew up in the suburbs of London, and I was born in 1949. That's not that long after the Second World War, right? So it's still only 4 years earlier, bombs have been falling. In fact, I found the tail fins of a German incendiary bomb in our garden when I was a small boy. And I was very excited by that, as you can imagine. A sort of rusty tail fins. My mother made me throw it in the dustbin. I was very sorry. But I think she was right. I mean, she was obviously frightened I was going to find a live one next time, and she didn't want me touching, what could be explosive. So I was born in that atmosphere, and the 1940s and 1950s was a very difficult time in Britain. I've still got a ration card somewhere from 1950. We were still being rationed right up till then. Even as a small boy, you couldn't get many sweets because sugar was rationed. There weren't the sweet shops that there are now. It was a difficult time, drab, but everyone was very relieved that the war was over. It was a constant subject of conversation with my parents' generation. Everything was always referred back to the war, but they would never really tell you anything about what they actually did, or very little about what they actually did during the war. It was something that they wanted to put that behind them and just enjoy the peace. And for them, just to have a home, to raise a family in normal circumstances, to mow the lawn on a Saturday, to have an ordinary job, and no bombs falling, that to them was bliss. And they didn't need to look for anything more because they'd been through such torment and trauma that was enough for one life. And I understand that now very well. Anyway, I was born into the suburbs of London, and as a baby, I was in my pram. I only know this because other people have told me about this. I can't remember it myself. But I was in my pram as a baby, and I was abducted. My mother left the pram outside the shop while she went to buy some stuff inside. Came back, empty pram. Now you can imagine how she must have felt. Shock, the horror, the guilt, all of those things. And for 3 days I was lost. And eventually I was returned, and the story went that I'd been taken by an old woman, crazy old woman, whatever. Anyway, I'd been looked after properly. I was all right, and I was returned to my family. Now, I can't help but wonder, was that really just an old woman, or was it something else? Was it someone else? I have no idea. Maybe I'll do a regression sometime and try and see if I can find out more about what actually happened during that occasion. But anyway, I grew up in the suburbs of London. I was brought up as a Roman Catholic. I went to Mass every week and sang in the choir. At one point I was serving on the altar, carrying the candles and what have you. A normal boy. And at 13, I went off to boarding school, which was quite normal. Actually, the oldest Catholic boarding school, or well, I should say public school. What we call public schools in this country are really very private. You have to pay money, a lot of money, to go to them. But it was the oldest Catholic post-Reformation school in the country. And I was sent there, and our teachers were nearly all of them priests. And some of the boys, not myself, but some of the boys were actually intending to go into the priesthood. You know, at age 13, 12, 13, they had made up their minds that that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to be priests. So it was. We also had attached to the school a seminary, which is where they train young men to become priests. Seminary, the seed of the church, you could say. So we had lots of these young men in their cassocks, you know, going into the chapel, and there were deacons and sub-deacons, or all, you know, I don't know too much about that because I didn't do it myself. But it was full-blown, and it was like being back in the Middle Ages in terms of religion. Everything was in Latin, you know, the Mass, everything was all in Latin still. That didn't change until after I'd left school. And we were seeing exactly what it must have been like to have lived in a normal Catholic environment before the Reformation. And that, at the time, I loathed it, to be honest with you. I mean, I was not really into all of that. And I'm still not. But it was a very, very good training for me, because it gave me insights into being able to understand more about what Western religion is all about, at least from the Catholic perspective. Although I turned my back on Catholicism later, I'm still grateful for that. And we were taught Latin and we were taught Greek. I wasn't very good at either of them, but that is something that I'm also grateful for, because I can read Greek and I can understand better the Latin, having grown up with that, you know, all the Mass in Latin. It's given me more of a foundation, if you like, in Western culture, and that's very important too. But I myself, I was a scientist. You know, my passion was chemistry, and I was quite good at mathematics and physics. Those were the subject areas that I excelled in, and those were what I did for A-levels. A-levels are the advanced. At those days we have what we call O-levels, ordinary, for your leaving school, and you try and get as many of these certificates for different subject areas as you can. And when I first was at school, most boys, I think girls as well, would leave school at 15 or 16, most of them, and they would go into work. Sounds extraordinary today, doesn't it? But they did, and they would go in, and then they would become junior clerks or secretaries, or you know, some kind of apprenticeship role that would prepare them for the life in the workforce. A relatively few would stay on to do A-levels, advanced level, and that would take them up to age 17, 18. And then they would leave school, and they would go out to work, most of them, probably doing something more managerial, let's say, from coming at that level. But then a few, very few, only 5% of the population would go on to university. And you had to have good A-levels to be able to get into university. At the time, you would get grants, and the actual education was free. You would go to your university and you would get a local authority grant to support you, or at least mostly, and maybe your parents would pay something as well. And you could go to university and do whatever you wanted to do. And I did chemistry at university. So this was the way that things were back in the day, right? And we're going well back now, aren't we? Today it's very different, I know that. But that's how things were. Now, I was always very, very interested, or certainly from quite an early age, in finding the truth. That is what mattered to me more than anything. I don't know, some people, they can just do science because they want to be an inventor and make money, perhaps, or they're just looking for a good job, or these sort of things. I wanted to know the truth, and I've always been like that. I've always been very, very inquiring, with my mind, to find out what is the truth. And I would question everything. I question religion, I question science, I question everything, because I want to know the truth. And that put me on a journey, and I've talked about some of this in other places. Partly a journey going to certain places in the world, looking for evidence. More of it was a research journey, of reading thousands of books. And in my early 20s, I actually worked in the publishing industry. And my first job was in a small publishing house, publishing esoteric books, including Jonathan Livingstone Seagull, the British version. And then later on, I worked for a famous bookshop called Watkins in London. And I ran the mail order department there. And they are, or still are, and certainly were then, the go-to place for weird and wonderful, strange books on every subject. Everything from Hinduism to astrology to palmistry to, I don't know, ley lines to healing with stones, whatever, And for me, this was like going, into the sweet shop. You've got all this material to read and study and try and find out. Most of it, I must say, is complete rubbish, but amongst all that chaff, there were grains of truth, and I was able to study and read those. And I was particularly interested in the teachings of a couple of guys called Gurdjieff and Uspensky, which I've talked about in some of my lectures. I wanted to find what they'd set up schools, so-called, where they would teach the way, the path, and I was keen to find one of those. But they don't make it easy, or they didn't then. They didn't advertise on the internet. There wasn't an internet, but I did track down one of their students, a man called J.G. Bennett, John Godolphin Bennett. And he was an amazing man, and I went to his lectures in London, and I visited his school in Gloucestershire, near Cheltenham. And but I decided that wasn't for me. Although I liked his work and his writings, the kind of monastic atmosphere reminded me too much of boarding school, and I couldn't go along with that. So I didn't go to there. But I did get involved in something else, which I'm not going to talk about at this time. And in 1978, as a result of various work that I've been doing on myself, to do with training of the mind, to do with training of the body, I had what you would call an out-of-body experience, where I was taken by an angelic form, and again, I'm not going to talk about this too much, but I was taken out of my body to a region of heaven, which I believe is in Orion. I'll just leave it at that. And there I was brought before a council of elders, which is like, imagine you're at a table and there's all these pairs of eyes scrutinizing you, and you're standing there like this, and they're looking right through you. You can see everything about you. You have no secrets whatsoever. Everything about you is known, understood, catalogued, logged. And they asked me a question, and I said yes. And that question was, will you go back to Earth? Now, I could have stayed there. If I'd chosen, I could have said, no, I want to stay here. This place was so full of the love of God I want to stay here. I don't want to go back there, that horrible place. But I chose to come back here. And when I came back here, I was changed. That for 10 days, I was overwhelmed by what we would call the Holy Spirit. That I couldn't think an evil thought. It's a very odd thing to say, I know, but mostly in our lives, we have this constant struggle between temptations and good acts and so forth. But when you're connected in that sense, something higher stops all that nonsense, and you just think totally pure thoughts. And I knew that if I told anyone about this, that they would think I was crazy. In fact, I might well be carted off to a mental hospital. They might say, "Oh, this guy, he's gone off his rocker. We need to take him in for psychiatric assessment or something." And you can find yourself in sort of one flew over the cuckoo nest type situation. So I realised that I had to keep quiet, and somehow I needed to prove, both to myself and to the world, that I was not crazy. And I knew there was only one way I could do that, which was through writing books. But in the meantime, I went through a very, very difficult period of my life. And again, I'm not going to talk about that too much. But I realized that I needed to put my brain to work doing something else than thinking about constant thoughts, which were very upsetting at the time. And so I retrained as a computer programmer. And for some years, I worked as a computer programmer, which is the most horrible job if you're not that way inclined, and I'm not. But it really did occupy my mind, my brain. I was dreaming computer code, and that sort of was pushing other things out that were disturbing at the time. So I did that for a while. And then later on, I went back into sales with books, and I worked as a sales representative for a couple of publishers. While I thought about my own work, I'd written a book by then in 1984, 85, a book called A Cosmic Wisdom Beyond Astrology, which was my first book. But, nobody would publish it, or I didn't know anyone who would at the time. And so I put it away for now. And then in 1991, I started my own publishers called Solos Press. And that was the first book I published. Not surprising, really, is it? And then in 1992, I published a second book, which was an edition of Hermetica, which is a book I talk about quite a bit in my talks. It's the collected works of a school from Alexandria in the early centuries AD, but looks back to ancient Egypt and the philosophy of ancient Egypt, but put into kind of Greek garb, you could say. These things were written in Greek. The Greeks took over Egypt in 331 BC, and until the Romans came along, very much later, it was a Greek territory. But they still, even during Roman times, most people there would speak either Egyptian or they would speak Greek. So these things were written in Greek, and I've studied them and I published them. And lo and behold, before I go into that, then I had another horrible situation cropped up. Again, I'm not going to talk about this at this time, but I had a near-death experience, by which I mean I contracted salmonella, and the salmonella nearly killed me, and it left me permanently damaged with type 1 diabetes. And I think that was probably, I don't think this was just a material illness. I think this was something sent from a negative source to stop me and to put me out of the running, put me out of the game. I know that sounds a bit melodramatic, but that's kind of what I've come to. Because you see, a few months later, I met Robert Bauval, who had been working on the whole Orion correlation theory. And together we wrote this book, The Orion Mystery. Now, by then I was on insulin and I was able to control the diabetes, certainly enough to be able to write that book. But it was very difficult. But we managed to do it, and it was a major bestseller. Went up to #1 in the charts. And we were on television and radio. We made a documentary film for the BBC about it. And it's actually, that book has changed the approach of many people to the pyramids. And we're going to talk about that in later lectures. I have done things about it before. So that was back in 1992. I met him and we worked together on this book throughout 93, and it was published in early 94. And after that we went our separate ways, and he teamed up with Graham Hancock and they did other books. I meanwhile went off and did other books. I wrote a book called The Mayan Prophecies, then I did one called Magi, and then I did one called Signs in the Sky, and then The Holy Kingdom, and several others. You know, I've done about 10 books, I think. And that, to me, is the proof, those books, that I'm not mad, I'm not crazy. You only have to read my books. Yes, they push the boundaries. Yes, you might not agree with some of my conclusions. You might think, wow. But I'm not crazy. They're logical, they're scientifically written, and they are persuasive. I think that there is truth beyond what you're taught through that goggle box that you watch, through the school system, which is corrupted, through the university system, which is even more corrupted, and excluding from you the real truth, which is that you are a spirit living in a physical body. You are a soul. You say, well, where's my soul? I can't see my soul. Well, you can't see yourself, can you, unless you have a mirror? And even then, all you're seeing is a reflection. You're not seeing yourself. You are your soul. Your soul is what's looking out through your eyes. It's not your hand that you can look at. So this is the reality that people understood in earlier times, but we lost sight of, largely because of science. Yeah, it's true, isn't it? And pseudoscience, like Darwinism, which is a pseudoscience. I've done 3 lectures on that, so you can look at those if you want to find out why I think that. You might be very pro-Darwin, I don't know. But we live in a time when there are serious doctrines spread about as in the mainstream, which are not telling us the truth, which are denying our reality, denying who we really are, in order to keep us captive. So that brought us through the 1990s. Now, into the 2000s, I carried on writing books, but in 2007, I was giving a lecture down in Glastonbury. I've given thousands of lectures in my life, in this country, which is Great Britain, in America. I've lectured at the ARE, the Edgar Cayce place, many times. I've also given lectures in Canada, and I've given lectures in South Africa. I've lectured on cruise ships. I've lectured in Italy. I've given lectures all over the place. But I decided, I was doing this one in Glastonbury, and I've talked at their conferences down there on a number of occasions too. And attending that conference, there was a film team from a little new TV studio which had started up, whose objective was to make programs about these very subjects, all the things that interest you, all the things that are now done by people like Gaia, they were doing on TV. And they were an amateur team. They had a studio in Milton Keynes, and the channel was called EMTV, which stood for Edge Media TV. And they were broadcasting on the Sky platform. Sky is a satellite-based system. You've probably heard of it. Many channels there, and it costs a lot of money to hire one of those channels. But the guy who started this was determined to put this material out there in the world. And at the time, the internet was still quite undeveloped. We're talking about 2007, 2008. So I talked to them and I said, well, what about I do a series for you? And I thought, yeah, that would be fantastic. So I thought, well, I'll do it as the Invisible College. Because I had this feeling that we need something that was a true platform for these kinds of ideas with rigorous analysis. And that's one of the things that you'll find in my lectures. I don't bullshit. Excuse my language. I'm looking for the truth, at least as far as I can understand it at that time. I might change my mind later. And that's the way science works. It's never fixed. But at the time of talking whatever, it's the best that I can do. And that's what I always aim for, because I don't think you can do more than your best. Otherwise, it's not your best, is it? So I took this name, The Invisible College, because in my researches for another book, which I've got here actually, it's one called The New Jerusalem, which is all about how in the 17th century they wanted, after the Great Fire of London of 1666, and the city had to be rebuilt, they wanted to make it a New Jerusalem. They were very fixed on the idea that the British are the true Israelites. I'm going to talk about that at other lectures too, as to why they would think that. And that London should be the New Jerusalem. And you have to realize that at that time there was no Israel, right, as we would know it today. That was just part of the Ottoman Empire. And the very few Jews living there, they were scattered around the world, mostly in Russia and Eastern Europe. So this idea was not as crazy as you might think. So during the research for that, I discovered that there had been something called the Invisible College, which was a precursor to what's now called the Royal Society. You know, we had a civil war in this country, Cavaliers against Roundheads in the 1640s. And during that time, there were scientists who, from both sides actually, who carried on meeting together to discuss science. And the idea was that they were only going to talk about science. They left politics at the door, they left religion at the door. So some of them were Catholics and some were Protestants and some were nonconformists of one sort or another. But what they were interested in was their science. And there were famous people like Sir Christopher Wren, who later rebuilt London, or the churches in London. And a number of other people like John Evelyn and Robert Hooke and other people like this. So they came together and they would meet at Gresham College in London. And that was a sort of open university, you could call it, where they held lectures and there were professorships there. So they would meet there, but then they would also meet later on in Oxford. And they would circulate the minutes of their meetings, what they had discussed, the scientific, people would present papers, you know, scientific papers, and then they would circulate those by post to people who couldn't be there, and not just in Britain, but around Europe, and I don't know about America, maybe, but anyway, we're talking about the 1600s, so I don't think there'd be much in America at that time, but certainly in Europe, places like Germany and France and Italy, they would circulate papers to other scientists in those places. So it was a college, but it was invisible in that it had no kind of buildings. It was not a place that like a university that you could go to. It was invisible, but it was active. And that's kind of the model that I thought was applicable to what I wanted to do, which was to create a college. And a college really means a collegio, a gathering together, colleagues. It doesn't necessarily mean a teaching institution. We think of a college, you go to college to get a degree or something, but that's not really what it means. So we have things in Britain, for example, the Royal College of Surgeons. They're all already trained surgeons, but they meet together to discuss things and take things to the next level. And that's kind of what a college should be about. So I thought I'll start up this college, and EMTV offered me the chance to come and give lectures at their studio. So I go up once a month to Milton Keynes, where their studios were, and I would stand there before camera and they would film what I was going to say. And I talked about a whole load of different subjects, just sort of one lecture on each. Well, come 2008, during 2008, I had another attack. This time it was swine flu, and it went to my heart. And I was extremely ill. I nearly died again, lying in bed there. For 2 weeks, I was in absolute agony. But I got through that, but I was kind of weakened. And it took a little while. I pressed on with my work as best I could. And I thought I was going to die. In 2010, I was actually quite convinced I was going to die, and was making preparations for, writing a will and discussing with my wife where to be buried and things like that. And I was suffering from heart failure. And I went along to the hospital, local hospital, and they said, oh, well, you probably need a coronary bypass operation. And I wasn't satisfied with that. But I heard about a guy who claimed to be a healer. And he claimed that he had met the Orions, the extraterrestrials from Orion. I thought, well, I'm quite into Orion. So I thought, I'll contact him. Why not? Anything helps. I'm very pro Orion. I've done a lot to promote their cause, you could say. So I contacted him. I phoned him up, and I said, look, can you ask your Orion friends to give me a hand? I got this ticker problem. So I said, okay, all right. Well, I'll contact them. In meditation, and I'll send you some healing, and see what happens. Well, that night I had a dream, and in my dream I met the Orions, and they were tall, blonde people, and they're sort of wearing uniforms, a bit like Star Trek, and very serious. And they said, right, we're doing some healing on you. And they said, but there's only so much we can do. You'll need to have a device, and you'll have to go to hospital to have that done. Okay, all right. So I woke up next morning, and I was due then to go up to the hospital in London to discuss about this bypass operation, which I wasn't looking forward to at all, you can imagine. And I went to see the surgeon there, and he said, because you have to go and have a chat beforehand. They tell you, they take swabs out of your nose and check you haven't got horrible illness to spread to the hospital. They tell you the routine and what you should bring, etc., etc. And I looked around me and I thought, all these other people here, because there's a group of people who were being instructed at the same time. I thought they all look a lot iller than me, I don't look like them. Anyway, so I went to see the surgeon, and he said, well, actually, he said, I've been looking through your notes here, and I actually don't think you need this operation. I can do it if you want, but I think you need a device that's going to resynchronize the beating in your heart. And if you're willing, I'll put you on to my colleague, and we'll see what we can do about fixing you up with that. But if you do want to buy part, I don't know. No, that's fine by me. Yeah, let's go down the other route. And actually, I had been reading up about devices before this, and I was pretty sure that I did need one of these devices that he was now talking about. And that this is what the Orions had been talking about in my dream. So anyway, to cut a long story short, I ended up having the device, which is a resynchronization device, which gets the two sides of the heart to beat together, which they weren't at the time. And gradually, and it took quite a while, my health returned to me. But before that, I could only barely walk 10 yards before being totally out of breath. And there was no way that I could carry on doing the Invisible College, and I'd stopped doing that. And shortly after that, EMTV itself gave up because they couldn't make any money what they were doing with advertising. It was costing a lot to hire the Sky platform, and it just wasn't a viable option. But those lectures I did with them are still available. They're on Gaia, if you'll remember, on Gaia, and you can see them there. Some of you will have already seen them, I'm sure. And they're a bit rough and ready. Yeah, there was an amateur team doing the filming, and they did things like forget to edit the script where they were meant to put adverts in, and they left me standing there looking stupid while the camera's running for the requisite time. They should have cut that out and put the adverts. But anyway, it doesn't matter. The material's there if you're interested. So that was my second big attack, but I weathered that one as well. And I'm still here. Now, I don't know how long I'm going to stay on this planet. I'm doing my best to keep my feet here and not to be pushed off. But there's something else I want to tell you, and that is that we are living in very, very critical times now, which is why I've restarted the Invisible College and why I'm focusing so much on the Book of Revelation, because we are living in those times. And if you read my book, we got it there, yeah, Signs in the Sky, this tells you about the signs in the sky in the year 2000 that indicated that we are starting the revelation. And I've done, there's another program you can watch called Signs in the Sky on my video channel of it's a documentary following a little tour group I took to Israel and Egypt in line with that book. And I recommend you to watch that. Anyway, so we're living in these very, very critical times, and I want to tell you something else, that there is a splitting happening. We're in the time of the tribulation. A tribula was a kind of whip with three belts on it, which it wasn't really for whipping people, it was actually for whipping grain, wheat, to separate the wheat from the chaff. And what they would do is they would spread the grain out on the floor, the concrete floor, or I suppose it wouldn't be concrete in those days, it would be stone, and they would beat it with this whip, yeah? And then they would take separate the chaff from the grain, and then they'd throw it up in the air. They do it on a windy day. The wind would carry away the chaff, and the grain would fall to the ground. So this is how they separated the wheat grain from the sort of rough husk that you don't want. And we are in that time now, and the way that this is the tribulation that's mentioned in the Bible, and the way that's happening is that it's like you put on an electric field, and all the positive particles will go one way and the negative particles will go the other way. If you're into electronics, you use that to cause the separation. And people are being separated now according to their belief systems and their levels of corruption, and whether they believe in God, whether they are following a good path in their lives, whether they're doing the right thing as best they can. And we have got guideposts. We've got the Ten Commandments for a start in the Old Testament, and we've got all of what Jesus taught in the New Testament. And we should be trying to follow those pathways. And you're seeing how things are being revealed. We're finding out about paedophile priests, for example. There was a thing in the papers this week. I forget how many thousands it was, 17,000, 18,000 priests abusing kids in France over the last 50 years or something. It's absolutely extraordinary. And we've had the same thing in Ireland before, the same thing in America. And we're finding out about all the crimes that people have been doing against children. And believe me, that is something that is going to be punished extremely hard. And Jesus himself said, if you do anything harmful to these children, then it'd be better for you if they put a millstone round your neck and threw you in the river. That judgment on Sodom will be less harsh than it will be on you. So if there's any paedophiles out there, I would repent now while you can, because the judgment on that is extremely harsh. But anyway, I'd like to tell you something else, and that is that I've actually met Jesus in spirit. I've talked with him, and he's put his mark on me. And he is at the moment going round marking people. I'm not the only one by any means. I'm not so arrogant as to think that, I'm not that holy, to be honest with you. I have my weaknesses too. I like the odd pint. But he's going round and he's marking people, those who are his people. And it doesn't matter if you've been going to church all your life. If you're not one of his people, he will say, I don't recognize, I don't know you. So you should be prepared for this. And part of what I'm doing here with the Invisible College is preparing people, because this world is going to go through a whole change, huge change, bigger than any of us can imagine. And it's a time of liberation, and we're all going to be reconnected to the Logos. And again, I've talked a little bit about that in the past, but we're going to get more as we go on. So that's why I've reset up the Invisible College. Now, I don't know how long I'm going to be able to carry on, Something else might happen, Might have a stroke or something. I don't know. But I will do my best for you while I can. And I would urge you, at the very least, to, if you've watched this video and you think it's interesting, to like the channel, like the video, subscribe to the channel, press the little bell. Better still, you can send your email to admin.invisiblecollege@protonmail.com and get onto the mailing list. Because again, I don't know, what it's like with big tech. They can stop channels at any moment if they suddenly don't like what you're saying. And we can lose contact completely. So that is your guarantee that I will still stay in touch with you. And I'm sending out occasional newsletters to the people on that list. Even better, you can help this work. You can actually help what I'm doing. And the way you can do that is by joining the college through Patreon. And there's different levels of Patreon subscription. And the basic level is £5 per month, which is the price of a pint of beer. That's how I measure things, the cost of a pint of beer. Or two cups of coffee maybe in Starbucks, if you want to. I don't know how much Starbucks coffee costs now. It's a while since I've been to the States. But anyway, it's not a lot, and you'll be helping the college to grow. And I think at the moment we're up to 17 subscribers. I only started it a few weeks ago, and I would like that to be 170, 1,700. We need to get this word out in the world, and the more subscribers we have, each paying a little bit, the more that enables me to be able to do more, to pioneer new methods of getting out there and maybe having actual physical conferences. I'd love to put on a conference in the Albert Hall if we had thousands of people coming to the Albert Hall and we could talk together. I'd like to be able to do things like that, but I can't. I'm just an ordinary guy. I haven't got a lot of money, trying to do his best. And you can help me by joining the Invisible College through Patreon. And you go to the website, patreon.com, and look for Adrian Gilbert. That's me. And you'll find all the details there. You can join as a pawn, which I use chess pieces as markers rather than gold and silver and platinum or whatever. I prefer to talk in terms of chess. I like playing chess. And the pawn level is really good because pawns, as you probably know, first of all, they have the power. If they work together, they are the most powerful pieces on the board. This is, they can form a wall around the king and protect him from attack. That's the first thing that pawns do. But the second thing is if they can get to the other end of the board, they can be transformed into queens or any other piece that you want. Could be a knight, could be a bishop, could be a castle, whatever. Normally speaking, people would turn it into a queen. So they have this potential for self-development, which is what we humans have. We can become butterflies instead of caterpillars, to use another analogy. But there are other levels. There's knight level, there's baron level, there's royal level, each represented by different pieces. And you can join those. They cost more, but that's for people who got broader shoulders and can carry more. I'm not expecting everyone to subscribe to those levels, but if you happen to be quite well off, you might consider helping me more than the basic level. It's up to you. There's no penalty either way. And I will do my best for you. I will do my best. And there are programs that I'm doing specifically for members. Initially I'm doing some on Egypt, but there will be others too. And I may or may not release those programs to other people. But certainly for now, those ones are going to be for members only. Anyway, so I just wanted to share that with you. We are living in dangerous times. Yeah, and I'm not going to go into the politics of the world. You know as well as I do what's going on. But we are living in really, really crazy, dangerous times. And it's because there is this separation happening, the tribulation. And you need to be true to your values, true to the true Christian values, true to God. And if you'll do that and follow the way, you're going to be lifted up. You're going to reach the point where you can graduate as souls and go on to heaven. So thank you very much for your time, and I hope this doesn't be too long, and I look forward to talking to you again. Bye-bye.